Are you ready to learn the truth about how people survived in conditions that would kill a well-prepared tourist in a matter of hours today? In a world where there were no membrane fabrics, plastic raincoats, or water-repellent coatings, dry clothing was the only barrier between life and a freezing death. The Indians of the Great Plains and the forests of the North understood perfectly well that getting wet in autumn or winter meant signing your own death warrant, from which there was no appeal. Their methods of protection from moisture were not based on fighting nature, but on a deep understanding of its physical and chemical laws. Watch the video to the end to find out how ordinary campfire smoke turned leather into a waterproof shield, and why sometimes the best way to stay dry was to take off all your clothes. What if I told you that everything you believed was wrong? We are used to thinking that in cold and rainy weather, we need to wear as many layers of clothing as possible to stay warm and protect ourselves from moisture. However, for the indigenous peoples of America, the main enemy was not the water falling from the sky, but the moisture coming from their own bodies. During intense hunting or rapid travel across rough terrain, a person would inevitably begin to sweat, and this internal moisture was deadly. Clothes wet with sweat lost their insulating properties and cooled instantly when the person stopped, turning into an ice pack. Experienced Lakota warriors and hunters knew this secret and used a method that shocked the first European observers. Before starting intense running or hard work, they took off most of their clothes despite the cold or drizzle. They carefully folded their shirts and leggings, hiding them in waterproof leather bags or under reliable shelters. Remaining in minimal clothing, they allowed sweat to evaporate freely from their skin without being absorbed into valuable fur and leather items. This required tremendous fortitude and willpower, but it guaranteed dry clothes at the rest stop. A body warmed by movement can withstand cold and moisture much longer than a body wrapped in wet skin. Rain or snow falling on warmed skin evaporated or ran off without causing significant harm to the body in motion. The main task was to keep the main set of clothes completely dry for when the activity stopped. As soon as the hunter stopped, he wiped his body dry with grass or moss and put on the dry clothes he had kept. This contrast between the icy air and the dry, warm fur instantly restored the heat balance. To Europeans encased in wool and cotton, such a practice seemed wild and crazy, leading to colds. They did not understand that their multi-layered clothing, soaked with sweat, was killing them slowly and imperceptibly, drawing out their heat hour after hour. The Indian, on the other hand, consciously controlled his heat exchange, using his own metabolism as his main heater. It was a strategy of active survival, where the risk of short-term hypothermia was the price to pay for long-term safety. The ability to sense the line between when to undress and when to wrap up warm was instilled from an early age. A culture of physical endurance allowed them to make journeys that seemed impossible for the untrained. Skin accustomed to wind and precipitation became less sensitive and denser, acting as a natural barrier. This was not recklessness, but a cold calculation based on knowledge of physiology. Dry clothes in a backpack or bundle were always more valuable than wet clothes on the body. That is why many old images show warriors half naked even in cool weather. Interestingly, professional marathon runners and skiers use a similar principle today, but they came to it through science. The Indians came to it through generations of experience, paid for with the lives of those who did not learn the lesson. Staying dry inside was the first and most important rule of survival in the wild. A mistake in this matter was too costly, and nature did not forgive carelessness. It was a philosophy of bodily discipline, where comfort was sacrificed for survival. In the high humidity of the eastern forests where the Iroquois lived, this method was even more relevant due to the dampness. Clothes took days to dry there, and getting them wet meant condemning oneself to long suffering. Therefore, sweat control was elevated to an art form accessible to every man in the tribe. Even in winter, when traveling on snowshoes, they took great care not to overheat. Unbuttoning a collar, removing mittens, or taking off a hood, these small things saved lives. Thus, the first raincoat of the Indian was his own skin and the proper management of layers of clothing. This required an understanding of one's body and an absence of false shame before the elements. European clothing, with its buttons and complex cut, did not allow for such flexibility. Native American clothing was modular, allowing for instant adaptation to changes in activity. This wisdom has been forgotten by modern city dwellers, but it remains the foundation of survival. We are very interested in hearing your opinion. What do you think about such a radical method of thermoregulation? Would you be able to do this in winter? Write about it in the comments. And be sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next episodes about the secrets of ancient survival masters. Are you ready to learn the truth about a technology that was thousands of years ahead of its time? We are used to thinking of suede and leather as materials that are afraid of water and become stiff and brittle after drying. However, the clothing of the indigenous peoples of North America had unique properties that made it suitable for harsh conditions. The secret was not simply in the tanning of the hides, but in a complex chemical process that we now call aldehyde tanning. The main tool in this process was thick, rich smoke from rotten wood, which was used to impregnate the clothing. The process of creating such clothing began long before the rain or snowfall started. Deer or moose skins were cleaned of wool and flesh, and then treated with a mixture of animal brains and water. This emulsion penetrated deep into the collagen fibers, softening them and making the skin elastic, similar to dense fabric. But this treatment alone did not provide protection from water, and a wet skin would turn into stiff cardboard after drying. The magic happened during the smoking stage, when the skin was sewn into a bag-like shape and hung over a smoldering fire. The smoke passed through the pores of the skin and reacted chemically with the proteins in the material, enveloping the fibers in a protective layer. The aldehydes and resins contained in the smoke created stable bonds that were not destroyed by water. The result was the famous Indian suede, or buckskin, which had amazing properties. It could get wet in heavy rain, but unlike ordinary leather, it remained soft and flexible after drying. This meant that clothes could be dried by the fire and worn again without fear of them breaking or rubbing the body. The color of such clothing varied from golden yellow to dark brown, depending on the smoking time and the type of wood. The darker the leather, the more it was smoked and the higher its water-repellent properties. The Indians understood this relationship perfectly and prepared clothing with special reinforced treatment for wet seasons. The smell of smoke, which was permanently absorbed into the clothing, was not just the aroma of a fire, but the smell of reliability and protection. For a warrior, this smell meant that his second skin was ready to withstand the elements. In addition, smoke had antiseptic properties, preventing skin from rotting in damp conditions. In forests, where everything was saturated with moisture and fungus, ordinary organic matter decomposed very quickly. Smoked clothing lasted for years, did not mold, and did not lose its strength even when constantly wet. It was the first technological fabric in history created in harmony with nature. It breathed wicking moisture away from the body, while protecting it from external influences. Unlike modern impregnations, which wash out after several washes, smoke tanning was permanent. If the properties began to weaken, the clothes could simply be held over smoke again to restore the protective layer. This maintenance cycle was simple and accessible to everyone in any conditions, even far from the main camp. No complex chemicals or rare ingredients were required, only wood and fire. This made the technology completely self-sufficient and independent of external resources. It is important to note that different tribes used different types of wood to achieve the desired effect. Rotten wood produced cold, thick smoke without an open flame, which prevented overheating and damage to the leather. The craftsmen knew how to regulate the temperature and density of the smoke to obtain material of perfect quality. This knowledge was passed down from generation to generation and was considered one of the most important skills for women of the tribe. The lives of hunters and warriors depended on the quality of the clothing. Even today, reenactors and survival experts recognize the superiority of properly tanned buckskin over many modern materials. It does not rustle, does not melt from campfire sparks, and provides excellent thermoregulation. In the forest, where silence is the key to a successful hunt, the quiet, soft leather gave an undeniable advantage. And the ability to quickly dry clothes by the fire without the risk of damaging them was critically important. The Indians did not try to create absolute waterproofing. they created repairability and durability. This method of protecting clothing was universal for all regions, from the humid forests of the east to the dry plains. Wherever hunting took place and skins were used, smoking technology was also used. It was a standard of quality proven by centuries of harsh life on the continent. Clothing was not just a utilitarian item, it was the result of a complex technological process. But no matter how perfect the material, water always finds its way in, especially from below. But even the best leather shirt is useless if your feet are wet and cold. In the next chapter, we will learn about the item of clothing that required the most attention and protection. I will reveal the best-kept secret that allowed hunters to stay dry, even in swamps. If smoke worked on a micro level, protecting the structure of the fibers, then fat became heavy artillery in the fight against water. Native Americans used animal fats not only for food, but also as a powerful water repellent for particularly vulnerable areas of clothing. Bear fat, bone marrow, and beaver tallow had unique hydrophobic properties that literally repelled water. Applying this layer turned clothing and footwear into something like oiled tarpaulin, impervious to rain. Special attention was paid to the seams, through which water penetrated most quickly. When making moccasins or leggings, women carefully impregnated the tendon threads with fat before sewing. This created a watertight connection that swelled with moisture and plugged the needle holes. After sewing was completed, the seams were additionally coated with a thick mixture of fat and wax, if available. This approach made it possible to create a structure capable of withstanding short-term immersion in water. In particularly humid regions, such as the Pacific coast or the subarctic, fat impregnation was applied to the entire surface of the clothing. Raincoats made of fish skin or sea animal intestines, impregnated with fat, were the true analogs of modern raincoats. Water rolled off them in drops, unable to cling to the smooth, oily surface. Of course, such clothing had a specific smell and was heavier than usual, but it provided 100% protection. On the plains, such complete impregnation was used less often, except for shoes and shoulder capes. The fat mixture was often enriched with coniferous tree resin or charcoal. The resin added viscosity and abrasion resistance to the coating, creating a durable film on the surface. Charcoal worked as an odor absorber and an additional filler, closing the pores of the skin. Each hunter had his own recipe for waxing, which he kept secret and perfected over the years. It was real field chemistry, using available components to create complex compounds. Interestingly, fat was applied not only to clothing, but also directly to the body in cold and wet weather. A layer of fat on the skin created an additional heat-insulating barrier and protected against chapping and hypothermia. Water, falling on skin lubricated with fat, rolled off without taking away the body's precious heat as it evaporated. This was a second skin method used by warriors when their clothes were wet or absent. Combined with natural hardening, this provided phenomenal resistance to the cold. However, the use of fat required caution as it reduced the breathability of clothing. A shirt completely saturated with fat ceased to wick away moisture, and the person began to sweat from the inside, which brought us back to the problem of the first chapter. Therefore, the fat impregnation was applied selectively to the shoulders, hoods, and shoes. The back and chest usually remained breathable, protected only by smoke tanning. This balance between waterproofing and vapor permeability was the key to comfort. Cape made of bison skins, worn with the fur inside, were treated with particular care on the outside. The leather side facing the rain was polished and impregnated with brain and fat to a glossy finish. Such a surface did not absorb water, and raindrops simply ran down it like a sloping roof. The craftsmen were able to achieve such smoothness of the leather that it became similar to parchment. This required enormous effort and patience during the tanning process. When crossing rivers, clothes were often rolled into a tight bundle and wrapped in an oiled outer skin. Such a bundle could even float on the surface, keeping its contents dry inside. This made it possible to transport equipment to the other side without risking getting spare items and food wet. The ability to pack things properly was as important a skill as archery. The fat impregnation acted as a waterproof bag. In winter, the fat protected the leather of the shoes from getting wet when it came into contact with snow, which melted from the warmth of the feet. Wet moccasins in the cold turned into ice blocks, which could lead to frostbite in a matter of hours. Regular lubrication of shoes was a daily ritual on which the health of the feet depended. The Indians used melted fat for this purpose, which they always carried with them in small bladders or horns. Their understanding of the properties of fats and oils was deep and practical. They knew which fats solidified in the cold and which remained liquid, and chose the composition depending on the season. It was a science of survival, written in the language of nature and proven by thousands of years of experience. If you like this story about ancient technologies, be sure to like this video. Guess how long it took to create the perfect footwear for the forest? Moccasins were not just shoes. They were a complex engineering system designed to protect the most important part of a traveler's body, their feet. Unlike heavy European boots, which took days to dry once they got wet, moccasins were lightweight and modular. The main principle of keeping feet dry was not absolute impermeability, but multi-layering and quick drying. The Indians understood perfectly well that it was impossible to completely prevent moisture from getting in, so they focused on managing it. The basis of the system was the very design of the moccasin, sewn from smoked leather. On the plains, they often used a stiff sole made of rawhide, which absorbed less moisture from the ground. The upper part was made of soft suede, which fit snugly around the foot, leaving no gaps for water to accumulate. The characteristic seam on moccasins was often positioned to minimize contact with wet grass or snow. But the real magic was hidden inside this simple leather shell. A thick layer of dry grass, moss, or bison wool was placed inside the moccasin, which served as both a sock and an insole. This filling created an air layer, insulating the foot from the cold leather and absorbing excess moisture. If the grass got wet from sweat or water, it was simply thrown away and replaced with a fresh, dry bunch, which could be found everywhere. This ingenious solution allowed for clean socks several times a day without the need for washing and drying. In winter, larger moccasins were used to accommodate more insulating material. The Lakota and other plains tribes used bison hides with the fur on the inside to create incredibly warm winter insoles. Even if the outer layer of leather got wet from melting snow, the thick fur and layer of air prevented moisture from reaching the skin of the foot. The main rule was to prevent the wet layer from freezing, so movement had to be constant. To protect against deep snow and water, high leggings were worn over the top of the moccasin. This overlap worked like roof tiles. Water ran down the leggings without getting inside the shoes. The junction was often tied with leather straps around the ankle, creating an additional barrier. This design was flexible, did not restrict movement, and provided excellent ventilation when necessary. If the moccasins did get wet through, drying them was a priority at any campsite. Thanks to the thin leather and lack of stiff parts, the moccasins dried very quickly by the fire, literally in an hour and a half. European boots made of thick leather required careful drying overnight, otherwise they could crack or shrink. An Indian, on the other hand, could carry a spare pair of light moccasins on his belt and change them instantly. There were also special rain versions of the shoes, impregnated with a mixture of fat and soot, which was particularly thick. Some northern tribes had high moccasins that reached the knee, which were similar in their properties to rubber boots. The seams in such shoes were so watertight that they allowed the wearer to step into water briefly without any consequences. But even the best impregnation gave way over time, and then replaceable grass came into play. The ability to choose the right grass for insulation was an important skill. Preference was given to dry, soft varieties that did not crumble and retain their volume well. Sedge, which grows on riverbanks, was considered one of the best insulators due to its tubular structure. It worked like modern synthetic insulation, retaining heat even when wet. Taking care of one's feet was a matter of life and death, as losing mobility meant certain death when alone. Wet feet quickly led to general hypothermia, as a huge amount of heat is lost through the limbs. Therefore, any experienced traveler checked the condition of their moccasins at the first opportunity. This system, which seemed primitive, was in fact the height of adaptation to the environment. Did you know that this principle of replaceable insulation formed the basis for modern multi-layered footwear for polar explorers? However, the Native Americans did not use synthetics, but rather what the earth itself provided. In the next chapter, you will learn how they used nature itself as a giant umbrella. In the absence of artificial shelters, Native Americans used the landscape and vegetation as natural protective structures. For an experienced tracker, the forest was not just a cluster of trees, but a complex architectural system with roofs, walls, and drains. The ability to read the forest allowed them to find dry areas even during prolonged rain. The most reliable umbrella was provided by dense coniferous trees, especially old spruces and cedars with powerful spreading branches. The crown of a mature spruce is arranged in such a way that water rolls from branch to branch, diverting the main flow to the outer perimeter of the tree. The space directly at the trunk, under the lower branches, often remained dry even after several hours of rain. The layer of fallen pine needles at the base created a dry and soft bedding that insulated from the damp ground. It was enough for a traveler to make their way under this green canopy to wait out the worst of the bad weather. Deciduous forests offered less protection in winter, but in summer the dense foliage of oak or maple trees could also serve as temporary shelter. However, the Indians knew that deciduous trees accumulate water, which then falls down in large drops. Therefore, choosing a tree for shelter was a science in itself. They avoided tall, solitary trees during thunderstorms, preferring dense undergrowth or groups of trees in low-lying areas. In addition to trees, rock overhangs and ledges were also actively used. In mountainous areas or on riverbanks, it was often possible to find natural niches protected from rain and wind. Even a small cornice overhanging the ground allowed you to build a tiny fire and dry your clothes. It was important to consider the direction of the wind so that rain would not blow under the shelter. In the Great Plains, where there were few trees, the terrain served as shelter. Ravines, dry riverbeds, and leeward slopes of hills created wind shadow areas where precipitation was less intense. An experienced warrior knew how to lie down in the grass so that water would run off and the wind would blow over him. Using tall prairie grass tied into bundles above his head, he could create a primitive shelter in a matter of minutes. Large pieces of bark, which could be quickly removed from fallen birch or elm trees, were used for short-term protection. Birch bark, thanks to its tar content, was completely waterproof and flexible. It was used to make temporary capes or small shelters for one person. It was a natural plastic, available in unlimited quantities in the forest. Woven mats made of reeds or rushes were also used, which were often carried as a universal mat and roof. The structure of the reed allowed water to roll off the stems without penetrating the mat. Lightweight and compact when rolled up, such a mat could be unfolded into a full-fledged shelter in seconds. It was the prototype of the modern tourist foam mat. Observant people noticed where animals hid during rain and used the same places. Deer beds under upturned roots or in thick bushes were often the driest places in the forest. Nature itself provided solutions to those who knew how to look and listen. It was an interaction with the ecosystem, not an attempt to isolate oneself from it with a wall. In the conditions of a winter blizzard in the subarctic, snow itself became the best shelter. A cave or trench dug in a snowdrift and covered with branches created a microclimate with above-zero temperatures. Snow is an excellent insulator, and inside such a shelter, it was possible to wait out the storm in relative dryness. The main thing was to shake the snow off your clothes before climbing inside so that it would not melt. Using natural shelters required a minimum of energy and time to set up. There was no need to cut down trees or build complex structures. It was enough to simply occupy the right place that had already been created by nature. This saved the energy needed for the journey ahead or for hunting. Are you ready for the shocking truth? Sometimes the best way to protect yourself from the rain was simply to sit down correctly. Native Americans intuitively understood the principles of geometry in minimizing surface area. When there was no shelter and the rain was pouring down, warriors would assume a special posture, turning themselves into compact, streamlined objects. They would crouch down, pressing their knees to their chest and lowering their heads, covering themselves with a cloak or blanket. In this position, the area of the body exposed to raindrops was reduced significantly. Water ran down their backs and shoulders, covered by bison hides or thick woolen blankets, without reaching their stomachs, chests, and groins, the areas with the greatest heat loss. In fact, the person turned into a living conical tent, from which water rolled off like from the roof of a wigwam. This allowed them to wait out the downpour, keeping most of their clothes and body dry and warm. The key element here was a cape, a bison skin robe. Bison wool has a thick undercoat that does not get wet easily and the dense skin serves as a reliable barrier. By throwing the skin over themselves with the fur facing in or out, depending on the intensity of the rain, people created an airtight cocoon. If the rain was cold, the fur inside created an air layer that retained body heat. It was also important to protect the face and respiratory tract from direct exposure to icy water and wind. By lowering their head and breathing into the crook of their elbow or into the fur, people created a warm air cushion in front of their face. This prevented them from inhaling cold, moist air and reduced the risk of hypothermia in the lungs. This breathing technique helped to retain internal heat. Group survival also relied on geometry. Several people could sit in a tight circle, with their backs facing outwards, covered with shared skins. The heat from the bodies in the center of the circle created a powerful heater, while the outer backs served as walls. This living structure was wind-resistant and retained heat much more efficiently than individuals alone. The static nature of the pose also played a role. Moving in the rain causes water to penetrate the folds of clothing and drive drops into the fabric. Sitting still allowed the water to simply run off the outer layer without soaking through. This required patience and endurance, but it was the best strategy during short but heavy downpours. Weapons were often kept under the cloak. Bows and arrows, which were most susceptible to moisture. When wet, the tendon bowstring would stretch and become useless, and the glue on the arrows could become soggy. Therefore, maintaining a dry microclimate under the skin was a matter of combat readiness. Warriors protected their weapons as carefully as they protected their bodies. This technique was used by herders and hunters around the world, but the Plains Indians perfected it by using huge bison hides. The hide was their portable home, bed, and raincoat all at once. The ability to wrap oneself in it properly was the first skill taught to children. No modern jacket provides such versatile protection. Even without a hide simply huddling together, a person loses less heat and gets less wet. This is instinctive behavior that we often suppress when trying to run away from the rain. The Indians did not run, but waited it out, conserving their strength. It was an acceptance of the elements, not a futile struggle against them. But what if you need to keep moving, and your clothes have already started to get wet? In the next chapter, you will learn how they use their own body heat to dry themselves on the go. Keeping your clothes dry is half the battle. The other half is being able to dry them without stopping. During a winter hike, it might not be possible to build a fire due to a lack of wood, strong winds, or the proximity of the enemy. In such situations, the warrior's own body became the only source of heat. The Indians used a technique called drying on oneself, which required the competent distribution of wet items across areas of the body with maximum heat transfer. Slightly damp moccasins, mittens, or socks were placed under outer clothing closer to the body. The best places for drying were the lower back, stomach, and shoulders, where blood circulation is most intense. The heat emanating from the skin slowly but surely evaporated moisture from the items. Moisture escaped through the collar or sleeves in the form of steam, without critically cooling the body itself if there were only a few items. An important rule was to avoid direct contact between wet, cold items and bare skin if this could cause hypothermia. Wet items were often wrapped in a piece of dry cloth or leather and placed between layers of clothing. This created a greenhouse effect, where the item warmed up but did not freeze the skin. Gradually, the moisture migrated outward to the outer layers, which could freeze, but the inner item became dry. Special attention was paid to drying spare insoles from moccasins. They were worn on a belt under the shirt, where they always remained warm and ready for use. Replacing the icy insole with a warm one, heated by the body, gave a tremendous surge of strength and comfort. It was an endless cycle. One pair on the feet, the other drying on the stomach. During movement, active muscle work generated a tremendous amount of heat. An experienced walker knew that as long as he kept moving, he could dry even a wet shirt on himself if he wore a windproof skin on top. The main thing was not to stop until the drying process was complete. Otherwise, the cold, wet fabric would instantly cool the body. It was a risk, but often a justified one. Women often carried children on their backs under a cloak, and the warmth of the child and mother created a shared microclimate. Small items could also be dried in this space. Mutual heating was an effective way to conserve energy. Collective warmth was used at all levels of daily life. This method required a good metabolism and a high-calorie diet. To function as a stove, the body must receive fuel. Pemmican, a concentrated mixture of fat and meat, was the ideal fuel for an internal heater. After eating a piece of fatty food, a warrior felt a rush of internal heat that helped combat the dampness. Wet clothes left in the cold without heat would freeze and break. Drying them on the body prevented this, keeping them flexible. Leather belts, harnesses, and moccasins had to be warm to function. Therefore, Native Americans were literally covered with drying items hidden under their outer cloaks. Psychologically, the feeling of warm, drying items gave confidence. A person felt that they were in control of the situation, rather than simply enduring hardship. This turned passive suffering from the cold into an active process of resource recovery. Each step brought them not only closer to their goal, but also closer to dryness. Ultimately, the human body is a powerful heat generator, producing about 100 watts at rest and up to 1,000 watts under stress. The Indians knew how to utilize this energy to maximum effect, preventing it from being wasted. The use of animal fur was not just a matter of warmth, but also a matter of hydrodynamics. The skins of different animals have different properties, and the Indians knew them thoroughly. For example, the fur of beavers, otters, and muskrats has a thick undercoat and stiff guard hairs. These animals live in water, and their fur has evolved to prevent moisture from reaching their skin. Clothing made from such skins worked on the same principle. Guard hairs served as the first barrier, allowing water to roll off without penetrating deeper. The undercoat created an air cushion that retained heat. Native Americans took advantage of these properties by orienting the skins on their clothing so that the pile faced downwards. This created a tile-like effect that repelled raindrops. Of particular interest is the use of fur inside out. In dry, frosty weather, the fur was worn inside for maximum insulation. But in wet weather, with wet snow or rain, the fur was often turned inside out. The wet fur swelled and created a dense layer through which water could not penetrate to the skin tissue, the flesh, which remained dry inside. Wolverine fur was valued by the peoples of the North for its unique property. It did not form frost from breath. It was used to line hoods. This prevented the face and collar from getting wet from melting ice. Wolf and coyote fur also had good water repellent properties. Caribou skins have hollow hairs filled with air. This makes them incredibly warm and light, and also gives them excellent buoyancy. A caribou parka could save a person who had fallen through the ice, acting as a life jacket. However, deer fur is brittle and wears out quickly, so it was treated with care. Clothing made from skins was cut to minimize the number of seams on the shoulders and back, the areas most prone to getting wet. Whole skins thrown over the shoulders were often used. The natural direction of the animal's hair growth was always taken into account when cutting. Craftsmen replicated the natural design. Caring for fur clothing included regularly beating out snow and dust. If snow melted on the fur, it would wet it. Therefore, before entering a warm dwelling, clothing was thoroughly shaken out with special beaters. This prevented moisture from accumulating. Fur that had become greasy from wear lost its properties, so it was cleaned with clay or chalk, which absorbed grease and dirt. Clean, fluffy fur retained heat and repelled water much better. Caring for equipment was a constant process. Understanding the structure of fur made it possible to create clothing that surpassed modern synthetic counterparts in many ways. Nature had already invented the perfect materials. Humans only needed to use them correctly. It was a symbiosis with the animal world. When clothing did get wet or was not warm enough, Native Americans resorted to plant-based insulation. Dry grass, sphagnum moss, cattail fluff, and fern leaves were used to create additional insulating layers directly under the clothing. This method, known as padding, created an air layer between the wet fabric and the body. Sphagnum moss has unique hygroscopic and antiseptic properties. It can absorb a huge amount of moisture, drawing it away from the skin while retaining heat. Native American mothers used it as diapers for their children, and warriors used it as emergency insulation. A layer of dry moss under a shirt kept you as warm as a wool sweater. Cattail, reed, fluff is one of the best natural insulators, comparable to goose down. It was collected in the fall and used to stuff moccasins, mittens, and even quilted blankets. It is very light and does not clump together as quickly as wool. Even when wet, it retains some of its volume. Dry grass, woven into mats or simply stuffed under clothing, created a ventilated layer. It prevented wet skin or fabric from sticking to the body, which is the main cause of heat loss. The grass created a frame that kept warm air close to the body. This method was especially useful in emergencies when a person fell into water or lost some of their equipment. Quickly stuffing clothes with dry leaves or grass could save a life in the first hours after getting wet. It turned a person into a haystack, but this haystack was warm. Cedar or wormwood bark, beaten into a fibrous state, was also used to weave capes and skirts that were excellent at wicking away water. These capes worked on the principle of a thatched roof. Water ran down the fibers. It was a cheap and quick solution. In the forests of the East, corn leaves were used to weave light shoes and rugs. Corn leaves are durable and do not absorb water well. They were used to make a kind of galoshes over moccasins. Knowledge of plant properties made it possible to find insulation at any time of the year. In winter, dry grass could be found under the snow, or lichens could be taken from trees. The forest was a storehouse of free materials for those who knew where to look. This practice of reinforcing clothing with plants showed that the boundary between clothing and the environment was arbitrary. Native Americans did not simply wear clothes, they supplemented them with elements of the landscape as needed. The last and perhaps most important element of the system of protection from moisture and cold was not outside, but inside the head. Native Americans cultivated a special attitude toward discomfort that could be called stoicism. Panicking when wet or cold was a sure path to death, as it led to frantic, rash actions and wasted energy. The ability to endure cold and wet while maintaining a clear mind was a warrior's main weapon. From childhood, boys were taught to toughen themselves up by forcing them to bathe in ice-cold water and run through the snow. This not only strengthened their immune systems, but also changed their perception of cold. What was unbearable torture for a European was simply an unpleasant working condition for an Indian. A high pain threshold and control over shivering allowed them to function in extreme conditions. They knew that shivering was the body's protective response to generate heat, but severe shivering was exhausting. Experienced warriors knew how to relax their muscles and use breathing practices to warm themselves. It was similar to meditation, allowing them to detach from the sensation of cold. The absence of self-pity was the norm in their culture. Complaining about the weather was considered a sign of weakness and immaturity. Nature is what it is, and man must accept its conditions with dignity. This calmness helped them make informed decisions. Whether to stop and build a fire or continue walking, risk crossing the river or look for a ford. Wet clothes were seen as a temporary inconvenience, not a disaster. Confidence in one's abilities and knowledge, how to make fire, how to build a shelter, extinguished fear. The fear of freezing kills faster than the cold itself, paralyzing the will. On group hikes, maintaining morale was everyone's responsibility. Jokes, songs, and stories around the campfire helped distract from the dampness and cold. The psychological support of comrades warmed them as well as the fire. The feeling of a shoulder to lean on helped them survive the darkest and coldest nights. Spiritual practices and belief in the help of spirits also played a role. Turning to the forces of nature and asking for protection provided inner support. The warrior did not feel like a lonely grain of sand, but part of a vast world. This mental armor was an invisible layer of protection that could not be lost or broken. It was this armor that allowed people to survive where technology failed. Victory over the cold began with victory over one's own fear. The history of indigenous peoples teaches us that comfort is not the absence of difficulties, but the ability to cope with them. Their resilience is an example of the limitless possibilities of the human spirit and body. We see that the art of staying dry without shelter among the indigenous peoples of North America was a complex system involving chemistry, physics, biology, and psychology. It was not a set of random tricks, but a deeply thought-out strategy for living in harmony with the harsh climate. They did not try to create a perfect airtight suit that separated them from the world. Instead, they created a breathable system that worked with the body, not against it. Smoked leather, fat impregnations, replaceable herbal insoles, and, most importantly, iron discipline and knowledge of their bodies allowed them to survive and thrive where others perished. This knowledge accumulated over centuries seems like lost magic today, but in fact it is based on simple and eternal laws of nature. Which of these ancient methods did you find most ingenious or unexpected? Are you ready to try using grass instead of socks? Or risk taking off your clothes before running in the cold? Share your opinion in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss new dives into the history of survival.